Today I welcome Lon LaClaire, General Manager of Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver. Lon has been working at the city for 25 years, where he started off as a transportation engineer in 1997. Mr. LaClaire has a unique mix of formal education with a bachelor's degree in engineering from Concordia University, and even more impressive, from the University of Calgary, is a master's in engineering with a specialization in transportation and structures. Vancouverites have indirectly benefited from Lon's travels to other major cities around the world, bringing back with him new and fresh ideas of how to make our municipality a more thriving, livable city. He sits on the Vancouver leadership team and has had his stamp on a number of projects, which include the Millennium Line, Canada Line, Downtown Transportation Plan, and of course the 2010 Winter Olympics. While working his way up at City Hall, Lon has co-managed the 2012 update to the city's transportation plan, and in 2015 he led projects such as the Arbutus Greenway and the seismic upgrades for the Burrard Street Bridge. Lon's reputation as a collaborative manager has worked well in overseeing a portfolio that touches all civic departments and, of course, Vancouver's 22 unique and distinct neighborhoods. Lon, thanks for being on Coastal Front.
Thanks for having me.
Good. So before we start getting into those topics, I would like you to take a moment to talk a little bit more about your title as General Manager of Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver, and tie that in so the listeners and viewers understand how big engineering is under the city budget.
Well, and the title General Manager of Engineering Services is still relatively new. For the city's history, it's been called the City Engineer. Okay. When you think of cities, the very creation of cities, in the Canadian context, there is no recognition of a municipality or a city. It doesn't exist in the Canadian Constitution. But municipalities have generally been created by the provinces. And the provinces do that to basically implement a way of delivering local services, which are primarily local streets, local water systems, sewer systems. And so in many respects, the reason the city was created was for that. In addition to that, the other big piece is land use, managing land use. So then they don't have to get into that minutia in every location across the province. So they delegate that authority, and that becomes the authority of the city. Okay. So I'd like to think that the city is largely engineering, and and also in addition to that, like the sanitation, waste services, everything that you kind of need to kind of operate and live in a city is generally provided by the engineering department.
Well, we can see from the annual capital budget for the City of Vancouver, and a lot of listeners might be quite surprised to hear this because we always hear about how big the police budget is. And the police budget is a very large piece. I mean, it's 21% of the of the annual expenditures of the city. And by contrast, the fire department, for example, is 9%. Parks and recreation is 8%. Things like corporate support is 8%. The mayor and council and auditor general are 1%. And utilities or engineering is a whopping 23%. You have a annual operating budget at the City of Vancouver, about $1.8 billion, of which the engineering portion of that is $525 million. So it's a big number.
Yeah, and what's interesting about some of the numbers you mentioned there, utilities 23%, but in fact the public works is the piece, which is another 6%. That's generally the piece people think of. And I only say that because utilities, if you look at the engineering operating budget, they make up 80% of the spend. But those are generally the stuff that's out of sight. Those are the water pipes, the sewer pipes, the landfill, the district energy system. So it's not something you see. It's the 6% of the budget, which is actually the roads, the traffic signals, and the lighting and that kind of thing.
Well, for those viewers who are watching, they can see this graph we have here, which is titled Engineering 2022 Budget, $525.9 million. And you said public works, for example, is 16% of that, or $84 million. So when you look at water in one form or another, either way through the form of wastewater or actual clean water, combined, it looks like under your budget, that's like over 60% of what you spend your dollars on, or you spend taxpayers' dollars on.
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Like, it
and
makes sense. We got a city with a lot of water around us.
yeah, and in fact, there's a new term we call one water. It's a way of kind of bringing all the waters together because there's the potable water, there's the rainwater, and unfortunately, we use potable water for almost everything, even irrigation. When of course, if we did rainwater harvesting, we could actually use other things for it. And then on the wastewater side, there's the stormwater, which is generally considered cleaner because it's dropping from the sky and it's rain. And then there's the sanitary system, which is generally coming from your dishwasher in your bathroom, things like that. So there's a number of different pieces to the whole water story, and of course we're trying to bring them all together into one because we have pressures on all fronts. The extreme dry summers we're experiencing now have conservation become an issue, and the kind of rainwater harvesting, kind of the intensity of rainfall causing our sewer pipes to be overwhelmed. So there's a number of things that we do that actually tick a whole bunch of different boxes.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into this whole conversation about water. It's quite fascinating, and it's obviously, for a lot of us who maybe not hearing this for the first time, realizing that it's actually a massive part of the city's budget. Before we do, let's maybe talk a little bit more about the history of Vancouver, when we were incorporated, because I know you're I get the sense you're a bit of a history buff. You know a lot of this stuff, and we also obviously have a new mayor and council coming in, and I don't know if that changes kind of your plans or scope. But maybe you could talk a little bit about Vancouver's history, how it ties into our infrastructure, because I made as an introduction, our aging infrastructure, and what you might see happening over the next 4 to 8 years.
Sure. So the one thing that kind of strikes me, when I moved to Vancouver, I moved here during Expo 86. I got a job at the BC Pavilion. It was a fun event. That was celebrating Vancouver's birthday. 100 years. It was 100 years. A couple years later, I moved to Montreal to study my undergraduate degree, and they were celebrating 350 years.
Wow.
So just to kind of put that in perspective, this is a very young city, and a lot of it was built about the same time. And that's because we also don't include the new suburbs, which are kind of out there in the periphery. So starting from zero, in fact, if I look at our oldest water pipes, they're 1900. Right, so that's kind of
that are still in existence today.
Yeah, we have some really old ones. Yeah,
wow.
That are over 100 years old. We're supposed to replace them every 100 years, but if you can imagine, up until 86, we didn't have pipes that were over 100 years old.
I see.
And whereas a city like Montreal would have had many pipes that were way older. And so they had been in the renewal business for quite some time, and they've just had to ramp it up. For a city like Vancouver, where generally our assets, especially the pipes, water and sewer pipes, last about 100 years, the renewal piece is now coming on big. Because all of that was built out in those first decades of the 1900s, up until around the 1950s and 1960s. So everything that we have in the city is unfortunately a similar age.
Right. Yeah.
And so now the consequence of that for us is renewal starting to be a big thing, going to become a bigger and bigger thing for many decades to come.
For many decades. I mean, that's a really important point for a listener to understand. We're not talking about something that runs on a political cycle of, say, 3 or 4 years. I mean, we're talking many decades.
Yeah, when you have, say, 20% of the city that was built out over 1 decade, for example,
right.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And the nice steady state for renewal, where most cities would want to be, is replacing 1 or 2% of the system every year.
Yeah.
And of course, if your system was built incrementally with 1% of it every year, then that would be an easy task.
Yeah.
But the difficult task that we have is that a whole bunch of pipes are going to become aging at the same time, which means that water main breaks and sewer pipe failures are actually going to become more and more frequent, even though we're spending a lot more time and attention to replace them.
You can see the headlines now. So that's really helpful insight on what the picture looks like today. Is it fair to say then, if I go and take this glass of water, if I'm in some random one of the 22 neighborhoods in Vancouver, pretty good chance that at some point this water ran through a 70, 80-year-old pipe in order to get into my glass?
Yep, very good chance. Yep.
Right. Same pipe that my grandparents were probably drinking from.
Yeah.
Are there any neighborhoods in particular that need more attention than others?
Well, I would say the biggest pressures that we're feeling right now are related to the climate change ones.
Okay.
So sewage and drainage systems, of course, require us to convey that water away from the neighborhood. But we do have kind of two things happening. One is sea level rise. That's affecting our waterfronts. Over by Jericho, Locarno.
Yeah.
It was actually all very flat, and the first homes were actually quite flat, and we do annual temporary sandbagging and diking there. But also the rainfall intensity. So that ends up hitting a few neighborhoods particularly hard where their pipes are undersized, and so the water ends up through overland flow pooling in areas, causing potentially property damage in that way.
Right.
So those are generally the low-lying areas across the city that are the biggest challenge, and are going to have to be the focus in the first couple decades for sure.
Okay. Well, within your budget under wastewater or sewage, being that it represents 32% of this $525 million annual budget for engineering, and then clean water is another 30%. By contrast, public works is 16%, and transportation is 15%. So within these groups of clean water, wastewater, public works, and transportation, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but what are the biggest expenses annually for these certain parts? It sounds like wastewater is going to be pipe replacement.
The sewer system is by far the most expensive asset. The entire system is the most expensive asset in the city.
Yeah.
And replacing it, there's nothing cheap about it. The system generally works on gravity, which means that the pipes have to have a certain slope, not too much, not too little. And of course, the topography goes like this.
Yeah.
The size of the pipes tend to be large. And so when you're replacing them, it's a big excavation. And there's just no way around it. Like there's no easy solution to our sewer system. I mean, we also have the audit, again, the period that we built out most of the city was a period when we used a combined system. That's not what you see in most cities. Most cities have separate storm and sanitary, and across the region, that's what.
So what do you mean by combined? We combined our rain. Stormwater, okay.
And sanitary water into the same pipe.
Okay.
And then it goes to the sewage treatment plant.
Okay.
And
when you say era, what was that era? What was it in the 1950s?
Yeah,
mostly?
yeah.
Okay.
Up I would say up until the 50s, 50s and 60s, and then everyone started doing it differently then, devising a two-pipe system.
And why did they change?
Mainly because they appreciated that the stormwater had the potential to overwhelm a sewage treatment plant.
Okay.
And the stormwater generally is cleaner water, which if you convey it to the receiving bodies untainted with sanitary sewage, it's almost like recreating the streams. And many of the cities, say the North Shore, particularly good example, where they kept all the streams. And so they divert the stormwater to the streams and the creeks and the rivers, and it flows quite naturally to the ocean.
Oh, interesting.
In the city of Vancouver, for whatever reason, people thought it was a good idea to put all the stormwater into a pipe. So we almost have no creeks left. We have two small ones here and there. It's like in three corners of the city. So all of our overland flow is conveyed into a combined sewer pipe.
Okay.
And that's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water.
And
so what kind of, I mean, it might be an obvious question, but what are some of the problems that this causes?
Well, mainly it's capacity. And the thing is that, again, if you look at climate change, it's changed our assessment of what's needed by quite a large degree. Typically, anyone who lived in Vancouver in days gone by would know that winter's rainy, but it's sort of a steady drizzle. It was always a steady drizzle. It's only this last decade or so, even less, where rainfall intensity has changed, and it comes really fast with really heavy flows.
Yeah, we saw that was it February of this year across the province.
Even this last weekend, those were pretty intense rainfalls, and we would have a curve
atmospheric rivers, I think they call it now.
Yeah, and they come up with the new name. It's like a river falling from the sky onto
so it feels like.
Yeah, well, and that's what it is practically. And so the way engineers kind of design systems is typically you don't design for the very worst event, because that would create a very expensive system.
Right.
So you kind of say, well, okay, there's a storm that might happen once every, say, 100 years or once every 500 years. We're not going to design for that.
Yeah.
Where it's cheaper for us to just let it fail and then kind of clean up the mess afterwards. And just accept that once in a while you get those kind of crazy events.
Yeah.
But when the 1 in 500 rainfall is happening every 5 years, now you have a different scenario, right? And then you don't even know what to draw for the 1 in 500 rainstorm. And so then what we have to do is we just have to take a different approach. And of course, two approaches for us is the kind of separating the sewer system. We're halfway through that.
Yeah.
So that's 50% of our city now has storm sewers and sanitary sewers.
When did that start again? That was 1970s?
Well, it's been, probably around then. It's been underway.
And we're already 50% of the way there. Okay.
And we use renewal as the opportunity to do that as well.
Yeah.
So when a pipe's old, we replace it with 2 pipes rather than 1.
Okay.
Which of course means that renewal is a little bit more expensive in Vancouver than it is in other places.
Yeah.
But
I was going to ask you a question, about the size, because you made reference to the size of these pipes. And I recently was driving along, I guess it was West King Edward, kind of heading east after Burrard Street. And there's a bunch of construction and there's these pipes that literally you and I could stand inside.
That's correct, yeah.
Is that what we're dealing with here?
Yep, yeah. So there's a big one on Canby Street that's being relocated right now for the new subway, the Broadway subway, and the station connection at the Canada Line. And it's that big. You could easily walk through it. But the bigger ones, that conveys to an even bigger one, which is across town, Interceptor, which then conveys to an even bigger one, which pumps it over the city under Highbury Street all the way to Iona treatment plant. Now, those ones you could drive trucks through.
Really?
Yeah.
They don't get full though, do they?
Yeah,
they actually get full?
Well, we don't want them to.
Okay.
In fact, what happens with a combined sewer system like ours, it's designed to not fail in a catastrophic way. So when it fails in a managed way. And unfortunately, with the way that fails, it actually just there's points across the city where it just overflows into the ocean.
Okay.
So we got too much flow. It can't all go to the treatment plant. The stormwater is too much. It's mixed with all the sanitary.
Yeah.
And it's going to go out a pipe straight out into English Bay or straight out into Burrard Inlet, and that's called a combined sewer overflow.
Yeah.
So that's just a valve that says system's failing rather than flood a bunch of houses.
Right.
We're just going to let it just go out, but it will go out untreated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John Kupar, who was originally running as one of the mayoral candidates, when we interviewed him, we never got a chance to release his interview because he stepped down as a mayoral candidate, but he talked in our interview exactly about this. And I was shocked to find out that we had untreated wastewater going directly into places like English Bay.
Typically not during dry weather because the system isn't overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's only during really big storm events, which are just happening more and more frequently.
Yeah.
Fortunately, those are the times that people are generally not at the beach either, which is good.
Yeah, that's good.
Or out swimming.
Yeah. So wastewater is a big component of the city's annual spend and part of your portfolio. But the other side of the water is what you refer to as potable water, clean water. One of the things that I'm always perplexed by is this the limited number of water fountains we have in the city. Is there a position by the City of Vancouver? Is there a strategy in place talking about climate change, heat domes? Summertime, we've got these cooling centers that are being created. But to me, it seems like an obvious win would be just to build more simple water fountains. It also would avoid people having to go and buy bottles of plastic bottles of water.
Yep.
Can you fill me a little bit on that strategy?
So that's gotten a lot of attention, certainly by our council, and so they've directed us to kind of ramp up in that activity. And right now on streets, I think we have 60 drinking fountains on the street. We're looking to add another 30 in the next 4-year plan. But we also deploy a little bit more strategically every summer when the weather gets particularly hot or we get into a dry spell, where we can put out a whole bunch of temporary ones. So we
I've
put
seen
out,
those before.
we put out like usually 10 to 15 drinking fountains, water refill stations. During COVID, we put out hand washing stations. I think we had about 10 of those out. And then another 10 to 15 what we call misting stations.
Yeah.
And so a misting station is just you're feeling particularly hot and you just need to kind of cool down.
Yeah.
So those are deployable. And the nice thing about deploying them is that during winter, they're not really needed.
Yes.
And so we can kind of easily decommission them and kind of just get back to a winter condition.
Yeah. Where are you getting that water from? I think are they connected to like fire hydrants or what are they? The portable ones?
Yeah, the portable ones we just connect to our fire hydrants. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give listeners and viewers an idea of like where does our drinking water come from?
Sure.
I believe that the answer is the Capilano Reserve there, but I don't know.
Well, we have 3 reservoirs on the North Shore.
Okay.
This region's quite lucky that way because it's very local. It's not very far away and it doesn't need to be pumped. But it's the Capilano Lake, Seymour, and Coquitlam.
And Coquitlam as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
Coquitlam's the biggest one, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's so big that it is kind of the long-term additional capacity should we need it. They would just need to connect another pipe to Coquitlam, and fortunately
It's a long ways.
Well, not if you live in Coquitlam.
Right. Yeah.
It's so a lot of the region's close to it, and the way the system works is that all these 3 reservoirs right now pressurize a regional network.
Okay.
And of course, it's actually hard to necessarily know where you're getting your water from.
Oh, okay.
Because if they're not using as much water from one of the reservoirs, say Capilano's getting low, you might receive more water from Coquitlam.
Okay.
In the olden days, before they brought in the filtration plants on the North Shore, when there was a localized slide and they would create turbidity in the water, they would kind of ratchet back from those so that we get more clean water from the other sources.
Yeah. I never realized that there's 3 different sources, and there's a lot of residents. I mean, this is not just Vancouver we're talking about here. We're talking all of Metro Vancouver.
Yeah.
Just for listeners to understand, I mean, your area of responsibility is Vancouver proper.
Yeah.
But you must have to be coordinating with the other municipalities and maybe through Metro Vancouver.
That's right. So with Metro Vancouver, they're the ones that manage the reservoirs and the treatment plants.
Okay.
And they manage the trunk, the large regional trunk lines that serve those. So they have a few big water pipes that come across Vancouver to serve Richmond and to serve Vancouver from Capilano. And then they have the big sewer pipes that actually convey to the treatment plants. So we connect into their system and collectively we fund those services.
I see. Okay.
I had in terms of the water system, my water design engineer had a fun fact for me. She had asked this question: how many water pumps are there in Vancouver? And I'm thinking, I don't know, it was like
water pumps.
Yeah, because we have the sewer system. It always wants to flow downhill until we need it to go uphill to go over this thing. Then we have to pump it, right?
Yeah.
And so, and most cities have lots and lots of pumps.
Yeah.
But anyways, the answer for the water system is none.
None.
Yeah. So because the reservoirs are so high, they create a pressure head, which is actually so significant that it can even fill our reservoir at Little Mountain, which is the highest point in Vancouver.
Really?
So it fills it, and then we kind of just the whole system stays pressurized. And what we have to do is the opposite. We have to reduce the pressure.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wow.
So we have pressure reducing valves throughout the city so that the water doesn't come through with so much force that it wrecks your fixtures.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So Little Mountain, that's a reservoir up there, and I think there's one at UBC as well. It was probably outside of it's part
it's
of UBC.
outside my area.
Yeah, your area. But when you see those kind of like big concrete blocks, that's a reservoir inside, right?
Yeah, it's
And
gigantic. Yeah, it's very big.
But does the water then go from the lakes through these pipes and then into those reservoirs and then dispersed from there?
Yeah, so the way it works is because when demand is high, it's drawing down on everything. That's
Yes.
when the reservoir is being used.
I see.
When demand is low, the reservoir fills up.
Okay.
So again, we don't want anyone to experience low pressure in portions of the city that are further away from the source. And so if there's a lot of demand on the system, then it just tops up the pressure.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's kind of so it generally fills up at night, and gets drained, lowers in the day.
Yeah. Now, being that the clean water is only 2% less, it's still 30% of your budget. And it sounds like a big part of your budget for the sewer or wastewater is just pipe replacement. Is that also the reason why so much money is being spent on clean water, or where's the money being spent on the clean water?
It's pipe replacement. Yeah.
Pipe replacement as well.
So it's the same thing. The water system, the clean water system, is just a lot simpler.
Okay.
And it's easier to replace. The pipes are smaller. The system's pressurized.
Yeah.
Because it's pressurized, it doesn't have to be deep.
Okay.
It can go up and over hills. It doesn't
Right.
matter. It can. All we need for it to be is enough below the street that it's not going to freeze.
Okay.
So that's really only a foot or two. Like you just that protects it from other activities that might happen on the surface, like us resurfacing the road and things like that, and prevents the water from experiencing cold temperatures.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if some sewer pipes are as big as like being able to drive a truck through them, by contrast, how big is a main clean water pipe?
Well, the biggest one that we've ever replaced, what is it? It's almost a meter across.
Okay,
Yeah.
so quite a bit
And
smaller.
that's coming right from Stanley Park, connecting into the regional system right up Harrow. So anyone who lives on Harrow would have experienced that for the last couple of years. But that's an unusually large water pipe. Just typically, not much more than the dimension of your hand, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say then that if the pipes are smaller, easier to work with, simpler system, is that system would the average age of our clean water piping system be quite a bit newer than our older one?
No, it's all the same.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the age of the pipes is typically the age of that neighborhood when it was built.
Okay.
So, South Canby would have been the 50s or 60s, and then the newest neighborhood would have been in the southeast at Champlain Heights, in the 70s, I guess.
Oh, I see.
60s
Oh, wow.
or
Okay.
70s.
Right.
So the downtown is also relatively new, kind of like you can imagine it all just kind of grew away from that epicenter there.
Yeah.
But we've already gone through the exercise of fully separating the sewer system in the downtown. It's just because of development pressures. So sometimes development pressures will trigger an upgrade before the pipe is old.
Yeah.
And that happens across our city as well.
Let's jump to bridges. Now, I'm a commuter coming from Point Grey to downtown. Take the Burrard Street Bridge, sometimes takes the Granville Street Bridge, depending on which one seems to be having more work done on it. But it seems like a lot of the work's been done. The Burrard Street Bridge has got this beautiful new structure now, and it seems like most of the work's been done. But fill us in, because I know when we were talking before we came to conversation today, you were telling me a lot of the work has been done underneath the bridges. Is that right?
Yeah, the work on maintaining bridges feels like it's never done.
Okay.
It's never done. And the challenge is that not only do you have the aging the structure itself, which often needs maintenance, and we just did some maintenance on Burrard for sure, and we're in the process of doing rather significant maintenance on the Granville Bridge. It's unique to the bridges themselves. Canby Bridge is the newest one, but it has seismic vulnerability that wasn't understood at the time when it was built.
Okay.
And again, seismic codes change as we learn more. And so that's why seismic upgrades are always going to keep happening, because
Right.
we discover some other piece of information. But the scale of the work, again, Granville's a good example. We've replaced the expansion joints on the top. Most of that bridge is a steel truss structure,
Okay.
which is protected from rusting using a coating. right? People might call it paint, but we call it a coating, let's say.
Yeah.
And it's due for replacement. And if we don't replace it, what ends up happening is that the rust sets in, and then we start to have structural failure. So we have some urgent.
It's not a good term to use when it comes to bridges.
No,
structural failure.
No, so we're working on that right now. We're doing the most urgent sections of the Granville Bridge, it involves scraping off the old coating, doing structural repair where rust has taken a toll and we've lost rivets or we've lost connections, and actually doing structural repair and then kind of recoating it. And that simple task, it's a big structure. We have it segmented. It will take decades.
Decades.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
But most of that work's being done underneath the bridge.
Oh yeah, so people won't experience it. Well, you'll experience it if you live under the bridge.
Right.
So Granville Island, or like you'll see it from below, but you wouldn't see it from above.
Yeah. What? These projects are amazing. Can you give listeners a context of how old are these bridges?
Well, the Broad Bridge was built in 1938. Granville was 51. 1953.
Yeah.
It's in a couple of stages. And then the Canby Bridge is in 1983. Yeah.
Okay.
1982, 1983. Yeah.
Now, it's obvious that those are three of Vancouver's bridges, but then you have Knight Street, Oak Street, and Lionsgate, but those go into other municipalities. So where does that come into play?
Yeah, so people think of those bridges as the big ones, but of course we have the viaducts, and there's the Grandview overpass that connects to First Avenue.
Right.
If you know the Grandview Cut, we have many, many bridges that cross the Grandview Cut. In total, the City of Vancouver alone has about 54 bridges.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's a lot of bridges, but of course you don't really think of them as big bridges because you think of the 3 or 4 that we have as big.
I could already see trivia night with Lon on Vancouver's trivia night. This would be unbelievable. 54 bridges. I love this stuff.
You don't want to own bridges though if you can avoid it.
Yeah, okay.
But the 2 bridges on the north shore are both owned and operated by the province. So Lionsgate and Second Narrows.
I see.
Across the river, it's a smattering of ownership. So the province owns the Oak Street Bridge, connects to their freeway. The Knight Street Bridge is owned by TransLink.
Okay.
That was a gift to them from the province.
Okay. Nice gift.
And then the Arthur Lang Bridge is owned by
Arthur
Lang's owned by the federal government.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So,
really?
Because it connects to the airport, and I guess they wanted to build a bridge, and so they own that bridge.
Okay, so you're not responsible for those bridges.
No. Of course, we're responsible for the connections to it, and as soon as those bridges kind of touch down and kind of enter our city, then the road network is all City of Vancouver.
Yeah. Okay. I want to jump to streets now and lighting, lights and streets. Some residents in some neighborhoods have noticed a bit of a purple glow coming from their Vancouver street lights. I've noticed in my own neighborhood a few of these overhead lights that light up our city streets in the dark winters we have here in Vancouver. And they're very, very bright and not really yellowish anymore. They've got this kind of really bright, and they look almost like LED. Can you fill us in on what's happening with city street lights right now?
Yeah, so we're in the process of replacing all city street lights with LED. We used to do it on a location by location specific basis based on safety and security. And so often if lighting was poor, even with the traditional yellow lights, we would come in and replace those lights because LED does provide a whiter light.
Okay.
And the whiter light, allows you to see color, on people's clothing and things like that. Actually, for people's sense of security, it's better. But we also notice that that lighting also allows motorists to see pedestrians and cyclists and others better, and so they're less likely to hit them. So it actually results in reduction of collisions.
Okay.
But so we had been doing it where we saw a benefit, like we almost do a business case where we would install them. But now they've come to a point where they save so much money, they're cost effective, and they actually have a long lifespan. So we've basically determined we're better off just replacing them all. And then we will, in operating savings, we'll be able to pay back the capital that it costs to do this big initiative. Both in terms of the power that require to lit them, which is a fraction.
Yeah.
But also the maintenance, because they tend to not burn out.
Yeah.
And replacing burnt out traffic lights is actually a big task of ours, and it's kind of expensive because you have to go out there in a big truck, and there's no cheap, easy way to do that. So we've started it across the city. There's like 22,000 of them that have to be replaced.
Yeah.
We had supply chain issues, so it's been happening a little bit slower than people wanted. And some of the BIAs, in particular downtown BIAs, wanted it to happen faster because of the safety and security piece, like just the way that it will kind of improve the ambiance in the downtown. But we have had some issues with the quality of some of the lights that we're receiving, and the coating. And so the brightness and the color lights is actually something that is a problem that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So those will be corrected. Don't worry about those.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they're under warranty,
Yeah.
and so the manufacturer will correct them, and then we'll get a good light fixture that has good light rendition and has long lasting life.
So you were on a podcast with Gordon Price from Price Talks a few years ago, where you mostly talked about transportation in Vancouver. You mentioned that the number of vehicles in Vancouver has actually declined over the last few decades, which I was really surprised to hear, because I find that driving from point A to point B is taking longer. Mm-hmm. Fill us in on that one.
Yeah, so we monitor the number of vehicles that enter the downtown, that cross the city boundaries, and we've done that for decades. Okay. So back to the 1950s. And you could see that over most of that time, you saw traffic volumes were increasing pretty steadily, I guess, up until about the 1990s. And that's when we started to see a decrease, especially in the late 90s. And it happened most significantly on the west side of the city. It was really, you could easily trigger it to UPass at UBC. Okay. Actually had a huge impact on traffic volumes on the west side of the city. We saw, decreases, some as high as 30% on some of those arterials out there.
Wow.
And in the downtown, that was the other big change. We saw generally volumes drop to about 20% of their kind of peak. And another, like, and there's certain triggers.
And it's not because of population decline, because we've been having population growth. This is, I guess, a better, more well-used.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things that are at play. Yeah. In the downtown, one of the big things that happened was the population went from 40,000 to 120,000.
Okay, right.
What that does is it puts a lot more people within walking distance of work. In fact, I could track as the population increased faster than the jobs increased downtown. We actually saw fewer people needing to commute to downtown, because they were already downtown.
Right. Yeah.
So they just had to kind of walk a little distance. But then we also had, introducing the Expo line in 86, West Coast Express in 94, and then the Canada line in 2009. Each of those moves delivered way more people into the downtown. And had a consequential reduction in traffic.
Okay.
In fact, with the Canada line, when that opened, because the city operates a number of parkades downtown, because we own Easy Park, we could see the cancellation of people, who had monthly reserved parking or whatever. They're just coming in to cancel it, and because they were switched to taking transit,
taking public transit.
So we end up with more people downtown for sure than we did many decades ago, but with less cars.
Now, we have a project that's being built right now along Broadway. I think most people know about it. For those that are not familiar, can you walk us through what's being built right now?
Yeah, so it's an extension of the Millennium Line, which currently, if you know, the Millennium Line kind of goes along Lougheed Highway, largely through the suburbs. It comes into Vancouver, and then it terminates just near Clark Drive, VCC, Vancouver Community College. So this would be an extension of that line. So it'd swing up to a stop at Emily Carr, swing up to Mount Pleasant, to stop at Main and Broadway, and then an intersection, a connection with Canada Line at City Hall, and then stops at Granville and Arbutus, and Oak, VGH. So 6 new stations. An extension will take that line basically out to Arbutus.
Arbutus and Broadway.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are interested in seeing this go all the way out to UBC. I think that being a longtime resident like yourself here in Vancouver, it kind of perplexed me that it took so long for us to get a dedicated train line from Vancouver International Airport to downtown. And then you look at the number of people that work and live in UBC and commute there daily. It's a huge number. I think there's something like over 40 or 60,000 people there now. I'm not sure. It's a big number. So where are we at with getting this line completed all the way out to UBC?
Well, I think the business case is very, very strong. In fact, this line is so busy. Right now it's managed with buses, like buses on Broadway and on parallel arterials. But that bus, the 99B line, is the busiest bus in Canada or the US right now.
Wow.
And when this line opens, the projection is, even though it's only 6 kilometers and 6 stations, it'll actually carry more people than the Canada line, which is 19 kilometers.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Much bigger system. And then at the terminus at Arbutus, the consequence of the transfer there is actually really significant.
Yeah.
We will be at capacity on opening day. And that's not good news, because that means west of Arbutus, the buses will be carrying as many people as they can, and the only option will be to stand in queue. But the expectation is that we can get going on that second phase, so that hopefully, it'll be under construction when we kind of have an opening day.
Yeah. So I got to assume that you've been deeply involved in this Broadway subway for a while.
Yeah. Before I took this job, I was a director of transportation, and 20 years of my life was in transportation.
Okay.
And this was the most important transportation project we could build, even before the Canada Line was built. It was
really,
it's always been a higher priority. Canada Line got some attention, I think, because of the Olympics and the potential to kind of serve that event, which was ultimately also needed.
Yeah, for sure.
But it sort of jumped the queue on this one. This one's going to be very, very busy.
Do you know where we're at on that?
We've heard from the province a commitment to complete the business case by the end of 2024. So this line opens in 2025.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's kind of stepping right into like a construction procurement phase. Yeah. I mean, it's encouraging with the federal government with their permanent transit fund now. So there's hopefully some momentum there to make that happen.
Yeah. Good. To wrap this up, I want to talk about a few fun facts. Again, we had a chance to talk before this today's filming, and I was just so fascinated with all the stuff that you've got. This, like I said, Lon Trivia Night in Vancouver. This is great. So let me start by asking you about the neighborhood energy utility. I'm sure most listeners have never heard of the NEU. It represents $7.6 million on your annual budget. What is the neighborhood energy utility?
What it is, it was created when we were constructing the Olympic Village for the Olympics, and which is still operating, and the idea was to get as close to zero carbon emissions as possible. And one of the ways of doing that is to adopt a system that's actually widely in use in many places around the world, which is district energy. And what we do is we have a heat pump over top of one of our big sewer pipes, and we extract the heat from the sewer water and send it back to the homes. And so
with their own sewer.
But it's just the heat. We
just
don't
the heat,
not the sewage. No.
Okay.
So it's a transactional thing, right? We transfer the heat to another conduit, and this pipe. I think the temperature of the fluid in there is like 50 degrees. So it's not particularly hot, but it's enough that you have another heat transfer thing at the building, which is quite small. And then using that system, you can heat water and space in the building.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And this is ultimately totally renewable energy. I mean, this is...
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting about it is that when the demand, say, for hot water is high, our sewer's running hot.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, say if everyone started to have a shower at the same time, the sewer actually is pretty warm because of all that hot shower water.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
And so we can actually our ability to pump it back is actually higher. Whereas, when the demand for hot water is low, we have less heat in the water.
Less heat. So. Yeah. Wow. Vancouver's landfill. Tell us about that.
So the only operating landfill in our region is owned by the City of Vancouver, and it's located in Delta. near Burns Bog.
Okay.
And so
So it's in Delta, but we own it as Vancouverites.
City
The City of
Vancouver
Vancouver
owns
does.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, sometimes it's not great to own these things because with ownership becomes the obligation to maintain and steward it in a kind of environmental and safe way. So that comes with a lot of obligation. But yeah, it's something we manage, and we receive this region's waste. It's like many of the budget items for engineering. Like when you look at it, about 80% of our budget is user fee paid. So
on the revenue side.
Yeah, well, neighborhood energy utility is a good example. Residents of Vancouver don't pay for that system.
Right.
Users of the energy do.
I see.
Same with the landfill. There's no taxpayer burden due to the landfill. But if you're bringing things to the landfill, you'll pay to tip it's called a tipping fee.
Tipping fee, yeah.
Yeah, so we receive waste and charge for it.
Yeah.
Same with the water system.
Right.
It's paid for by the users of the water
system.
system.
Okay, so 80%.
80% of the engineering budget it's money that it's in its own cycle.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean. Like
yeah.
the only way I could raise money for the water system is to raise water rates.
Right.
So people will have to pay more for water.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's helpful though for us to understand that that we're not subsidizing all of these.
So your taxes really cover the roads,
the
transportation system, the street lighting, and a bit of the stormwater.
Yeah. Okay.
Management. Yeah.
Yeah.
And street sanitation, street cleaning, also a big one.
Street cleaning, yeah.
Well, it's such a high priority for residents. But street cleaning happens like on a daily basis in much of the downtown.
Okay.
Where we have chronic cleanliness issues.
Yeah.
So street flushers on the downtown east side are a daily occurrence.
Yeah.
And the more trafficked areas of the city just generally get more
attention.
Yeah. Business districts across the city get more attention.
Yeah. Okay. There's going to be a new skating rink at what is currently known as the Plaza Nations. Mm-hmm. And I had the pleasure of taking my children when they were quite a bit younger to the open outdoor ice rink at Robson Place, I guess.
Yeah, Robson Square.
Robson Square, thank you. Can you fill us in a little bit about what's happening in development down in Plaza Nations and this new ice rink, and also the energy that's going to be used from it?
Yeah, so it's a new community center. It'll be a new daycare, a new ice rink. So there's a lot of new plaza, new waterfront walkway. So this is pretty typical of these big waterfront developments that you do get a lot of public amenities that kind of come with the density, and the skating rink is kind of unusual. Like it's not something we normally get from a developer. I think the inspiration was the proximity of the Canucks, and that could be a training facility for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the energy, the marvelous thing about a skating rink is that it's a huge source of heat.
Right.
Because to cool the water, to create the ice, you have a lot of waste heat. And so for a district energy system like ours, that's like tapping into a bit of a gold mine, right? So, so you don't have to search too hard.
Just like your Olympic Village example, you can recapture and repurpose that heat to help heat other nearby buildings.
Yes, one of our buildings connected in the system is Mountain Equipment Co-op, the retail store on 2nd Avenue. And they tend to need cooling, so they generally contribute heat to the system. And so what's nice about a district energy system is you have heat sources in places that need heat and places that have excess heat, and the system just moves the heat around.
Yeah.
And so the more buildings you have connected, the more it works.
So before the Olympics, did we have any district energy system, or was that the very first creation?
Not really, not in the scale the way we're doing this one. The downtown has a really significant energy system called Creative Energy, which is a steam heat system. And there's 200 office buildings. This one's probably connected to it.
Wow.
And that plant is over at Beatty and Georgia.
Yeah.
It's that big blue building with the big stacks, and
they
use natural gas to heat steam to heat all these buildings, but it doesn't have the ability to take heat.
Okay.
And so it'll be interesting to that's a private entity, privately operated entity, and so it'll be interesting to see if they switch to a system like ours, which is far more efficient.
More efficient.
Yeah.
I know that you've, I said as in the introduction, you've traveled around the world, and I believe one of your favorite cities in the world is Paris. What is it about the city of Paris that you like so much, and what are a few ideas that you'd love to see implemented here in Vancouver that's sort of entrenched in the city of Paris?
I don't even know where to start when I say, what do I like about the city of Paris?
Yeah.
The attention to the public realm is really, really quite impressive.
Yeah.
When I read this book that explained a little bit of it, was like how Paris, the book's called How Paris Became Paris. But this notion that they would create this beautiful bridge, this very first bridge, Pont de Neuve, but it did this thing which no one had ever done before. They had created curbs so that the the wheels of the horse and buggy wouldn't be able to go over it, and it separated the people walking from the bag, and so they created the first sidewalks, right? And then they not only made them nice protected ones, but big bays where you can kind of look out and you could look over the river and look at the Louvre and everything. And they created such a great space that everyone wanted to kind of promenade there, even the wealthy, which is created this social mixing that never happened before, where people don't know each other, which led to fashion, which led to department stores, led to like tons of firsts. On the municipal side, they creating these spaces, they suddenly needed lights. The first city to implement public street lights. First city to trial public transit, with horse and buggy, and things like that.
Wow.
So a sewer system which is unimaginably effective. Like, they have a sewer museum. You could go there and you enter through a manhole.
Really?
It's so cool. And better than videos of a sewer system. You can walk on these elevated walkways and it's all there, right?
Really?
Yeah, because it's so big. It's like these pipes are so big. Their city's quite flat, so they have a lot of issues with accumulation. But they devise these systems to scrape the bottom of all this accumulation. An idea that I like, there's so many ideas that you would take from there, but of course, like, even they were the first to really do public bike share in a big way.
Okay.
In its modern incarnation, right? And we are way late to the table on that. Great system though. We're operating really well in Vancouver. But even like they have two types of water system, which again makes me think about like water conservation, and they have the municipal water supply and then the potable water supply.
Okay.
And
what's the difference, just in layman's terms?
The municipal water supply, you don't drink it.
Okay. All right, that's the key difference.
That's the only thing.
Yeah.
But when you think about how many uses of water we have where it doesn't involve drinking, like flushing the streets or putting out fires or irrigating plants and things like that.
Yeah, watering plants.
We have some excess water coming out of projects like Oak Ridge because they have really high groundwater flow.
Okay.
And you could see how we could start a system like that, right? Like a non-potable water system, which like golf courses and parks and stuff like that could tap into, and they wouldn't put pressure on our reservoirs,
right?
And at time, anyways, it's just I
think it's a really important point, and it's a very interesting one. That, like, all of Vancouver's water is potable. Yeah, is that a fair statement?
It is.
I mean, whether you're drinking out of your tap like we are, that same water is being used to
water lawns.
Water lawns, right?
And in the summer, the number one use for water is watering lawns.
Lawns.
Yeah. Wow. And like this teeny fraction is actually consumed
for drinking. Wow, that's amazing.
I know, it's a lot of treatment for water that you just throw around or wash your car with, or like hose down the driveway.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. Going beyond Paris, and to kind of wrap this up. I love your passion for this, Lon, and obviously we're really lucky to have a guy like you in the seat because all your years experience. But when you've traveled around the world, is there any one thing that if you could put on a wish list of like, I would love to see Vancouver have this, putting it in the context of like an engineering lens, right? When it comes to like whether it's sewer, water, public works. What's kind of one thing at top of mind for you?
Well, the one thing that I think is the public space piece.
Okay.
I have a division which is public space and street use.
Yeah.
As a division, it exploded during the pandemic.
And are we talking about like parks? Is that what we're talking about? What are we talking about when you say public spaces?
So it's all the use of the street, which is for things not like moving vehicles, not moving water, not moving. So it's the whole notion of converting a street to a plaza, or outdoor seating for a restaurant.
So in some of these. So, for example, I live up near West Point Grey in 10th Avenue Village, and they've blocked off a part of a street that you used to be able to drive through.
Yeah.
Some barriers there. Now they got benches out for people to sit. And you see now people sitting and eating lunches and stuff. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
And during in the lead up to the Olympics, we had tried to get a few of these to happen, because rather than acquiring space for parkland or a plaza, especially in these business districts where really most of them are in need of a space like that, which they could program for events and things like that. We had very little interest or uptake in those kind of programs. But then the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a little bit less concern about the loss of the parking spaces, and a much bigger concern about being outside and being able to meet with friends in a safe place, because outside your bubble, you couldn't bring people into your house. So you'd meet at a picnic table in one of these plazas. For the restaurants, of course, they repurposed the parking spaces into outdoor seating for their restaurant. And all of those uses, I just see, we went from one trial to like 14 plazas across the city. Yeah. And most of them very successful and, worthy of being converted into a permanent kind of plaza space. Yeah. I see many, many cities around the world, especially in Europe, where they've created these really wonderful places to be.
Yes.
Like just they're just, and sometimes they just go on and flow from one space to the other.
That's amazing, isn't it?
And we don't have many opportunities like that, where you don't have to worry about cars and, like you can really just kind of hear the sounds of footsteps and voices and buskers playing music and
patios of people having drinks. I love it. It's great. That's a good vision. Well, I agree. I think having spent time in Europe myself, like lived over there twice in my earlier life, you're absolutely right. I think there's some great spots. To wrap this up, I'd be curious to know if people listening to this conversation today want to get involved in some way, like what are you appealing to, citizens of Vancouver? What can they do to get involved in a helpful way?
Well, I think that what I would ask everyone is to think about their city as something you have control over. Because you have a lot of control over it. And the opportunities to connect with us, the easiest ones are Van Connect. If you have the app on your phone, that's a really easy way to put in a service request, whatever it is. Yeah. And it could be a pothole, or it could be a burnt out light, or whatever. Without you telling us that, we don't know that it's occurred. Often, like this is a very big city with thousands of kilometers of street out there where we're not attending daily, and or we're not there at night. And so we don't know that the light's not working and things like that.
How many people work under the engineering department of City of Vancouver?
We got about 2,200 employees.
And how many of those are sort of so-called out in the field?
The majority of them. Yeah, so probably 1,800 or so are kind of out there in the field.
People working through the tough weather. Well, this has been a great conversation today. So the moral of the story is download the Van Connect app. I use it myself a lot, Lon, so I can speak to that firsthand. It's a great app. Lon LaClaire, General Manager for Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver. This has been a great conversation today. Thank you for all the work and all the people that are helping our city function every day, all your 2,300 employees in your department, and for coming on a Coastal Front today. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.